Good morning. Good to see everybody here this morning. Thanks for being here. Well, this morning's going a lot better than last week. I didn't print out my lesson last week. Got up Sunday morning and my computer wouldn't start. Took a couple of days. An update failed, and took forever. Took a couple of days to get it back up. And the big strain was it's the end of the year, and all of my accounting stuff is on that computer. And so I'm thinking, sure. And I can get more vocal too. I have one of those voices. But yeah, so I was saying the real strain last week in the brain was the computer that has all my accounting stuff on it was not doing anything. And the accountants are going to be beating me up here in another week or so if I don't get information to them. So hopefully today goes a lot smoother. Let's start with a prayer. Father, thank you so much for a beautiful new day of life, but especially for a day with the opportunity for us to get together as family, for the opportunity for us to study together your word. We pray that you help us be open-minded, not gullible, but open-minded. Help us be like the Bereans, willing to search scriptures in order to learn more completely your word. Our desire is that we gain wisdom and understanding so that we can share the word with others. Thank you for Jesus, and it's in his name we pray. Amen. Okay, Solomon. So you've heard me say it. Maybe there's somebody in the class who hadn't been here before. The series here is how do we take lessons from some of the judges that would help us in our life avoid some of the pitfalls that we see happen. And my particular topic is Solomon, and we will talk about Solomon. So last week was a bit of an introduction to Solomon. We talked about some of the things. I'll go over that briefly today just to make sure, if you weren't here last week, that you're on the same page we are. That would be chapters 1 through 10 in 1 Kings. We find the story of Solomon in Kings and Chronicles. Chronicles tends to not have a chapter 11, which in Kings is the chapter that talks about the things that he tended to fall away with or about. And so I chose Kings. I think there's only really one passage, I don't remember off the top of my head, in Chronicles that's not in Kings, and I don't remember exactly what that was off the top of my head. But the story is fairly complete between the two, except that Chronicles tends to focus on all the successes and all the great things that happened and how well, and not putting that down. The class isn't designed for that. The class is designed to be willing to consider the things that caused him to fall away and see how we can use that knowledge in our lives. Because honestly, at least in my viewpoint, in some ways, we live in a society that has all of the opportunities that he had to fall away. We live in a very successful society. A lot of wealthy people, a lot of opportunities, all these things. So that's what I would like for us to think about. That'll be next week. We'll spend some time on the takeaway. What I like to do with classes, Charlie does the same thing with the kids, that's really good. At the end of the class, what do we take away from this? Like the last 5 or 8 minutes of the class. But what I think we'll do on this is next week I'd like to have a nice open discussion if we can, and if we can't, I'll bore you with my conversation. But an open discussion about what can we do? How can we take the knowledge of things that affected Solomon in his life and how he reacted to it, and how can we avoid those kinds of things in our lives, to be better Christians. Like you've heard me say a number of times, get in a discussion about salvation and think about the people that we've known. Most of you are a little older. If you're my age, you've known some people, good people, ministers, some good people that fell away. And you wonder how that happens. And it's sad and it's disturbing, but how do we learn to avoid the pitfalls, or how do we attempt to? It's a matter of the heart. God clearly says physically we're going to fall away. We're going to do things we shouldn't do. Paul says that. I'm no Paul, but I can relate to Paul. Paul says, you know what? I find myself doing things I know I shouldn't do, and I find it hard to make myself do some of the things I need to do. Well, I'm in that boat just like Paul. So how do we take these lessons? So Solomon, he was born to King David. David had many sons. Solomon wasn't the first son. He was the second. The first son passed away 8 days in. And then a passage over in Chronicles that we read of all the sons, and that passage is just telling us that all of the sons of David, God chose Solomon to rule after David and to build the temple. And he wanted him to build the temple, just this stuff that most everybody here knows. And he wanted him to build the temple because David was a warrior. And so he didn't want the temple to be built by David. But David prepared for the temple. That was one of the advantages. So we're going to think about the advantages that Solomon had. So one of those advantages was David did a tremendous amount of preparation for the temple before Solomon became king. So made that a whole lot easier. And he says in that passage in Chronicles, and of all my sons, for the Lord has given me many, he has chosen Solomon my son to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. He said to me, it is Solomon your son who shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father. I will establish his kingdom forever, if he continues strong in keeping my commandments and rules as he is today. And an interesting thing in that particular thing, I wrote that down because, I'm always trying to share with you guys the interesting thing about understanding the Greek. And what I have is the Septuagint that I use for an Old Testament. And the word that is used there when he says forever, if he continues, that word forever in the Greek means as far as eternity. If he will keep my commandments, his kingdom will last as far as eternity. Seems a lot further out than forever when you think about it. But so all of David's sons, Solomon is chosen. And one of the things he does early on is marry Pharaoh's daughter. Was that a wise move? What do you think? I am going to get you guys to talk some. Why was that not a wise? He started out, Elisha pointed out in a little short intro that I did early on, filling in for another class. I made the observation, was he really wise? And we're going to make that observation again toward the end. Was he really wise? God gave him wisdom, but did he just give it to him, boom, and woke up the next morning and he knew everything he ever needed to know? Did he have to use that the opportunities that came along to learn wisdom? Like what was it? So Elisha pointed out, if you think about the dream, he asked for wisdom, so that took wisdom. Took some amount of wisdom to know, here's what I really need. So that was good. But we'll look at that. But was it a wise move to marry Pharaoh's daughter? He had commanded them to not marry in the Canaanites. And she wasn't. So did that violate that command? Marrying of Pharaoh's daughter? Well, she wasn't one of the Canaanites. Yes?
God also told them not to return to Egypt either.
Yes, he did.
So
This is true.
don't go back for horses or chariots. I'm pretty sure Pharaoh's daughter was
Yes. And we'll get to that passage. But that's true. She was pointing out the passage that talks about, he also said, don't go back to Egypt. So he did. But as far as foreign wives, in the text that talks about that, it's specific to a group of foreign women. But as we will learn as we go through it, it was a lot broader than that. Jack? Yes. But in some ways, the whole world was idol worship, right? Like in some ways, you know, that Greek mythology and all that, you look at all that kind of stuff, there is something inherent in mankind to worship, right? And then you find mankind just struggle to figure out what that is when you don't have to, if you could find a good text and believe in its authority and everything, it would simplify that a whole lot. So no, it wasn't a wise move. Would somebody else have their hand up over here? Yeah, Keith?
His request, he was the same person after he got his request as before he got the request. His wisdom wasn't some miraculous thing that made him be wise. He used the wisdom when he wanted to use it. If he didn't want to use it, he didn't.
Yeah, I agree. I think in some ways we find as we read, just for our benefit, that God works in our life and blessings, opportunities, but he lets us choose those. So in my mind, to some extent, I've always thought all of the things that came along, you know, if you tie it, and this is just a wandering thought, don't count it for a whole lot, but if you tie it to some of those passages where it says, don't take any thought for what you're going to say, you'll be given those words, talking to the disciples. I think God is putting that opportunity out there, and you're welcome to take advantage of it if you want to, and if you do, you'll have a good result from that, and you will learn. So I would, in looking at the things that go wrong, which we're going to look at later on in this class, it becomes, I think it seems to start being obvious that he didn't have 100%. He was a wise person, and he fulfilled all of that. Not putting any of that down. That's the difficult thing about doing this. I did a class way back. I don't remember now what it was. It was 10 or 15 years ago. We did a class in the auditorium here on Solomon, and I think it was like a 6-month, I don't remember how long it ran. It was a pretty long class. It's the reason I got nominated for this section. Man, it was fantastic. And now when I'm studying for this class, I catch myself wondering because there's so much stuff. When you start reading this, it boggles the mind, the accomplishments this young man made, right? It just boggles the mind. God didn't give him all that. God blessed him with wisdom, blessed him with some wealth and these sorts of things. But what he accomplished all of that. You know, it's not like he just fell short. He accomplished all of that. So that's where we are. Yeah.
Was it truly wisdom or was it knowledge? Wisdom is the using of God's word. So
Yes.
he had a lot of knowledge, obviously, but he didn't always do wisdom.
Yes.
Right.
But wisdom is actually, in the text it says he asked God to help him discern. You know, and that would be the application of knowledge. Yeah. Help me in a situation, help me be able to look at this situation and discern the correct path to take. So and that's why the translators use the word wisdom. That's not the word that's there, but that's why they use it, because that's what he's asking for. It's almost impossible. Translators want to use one word for one word, if at all possible. There's no such thing. It takes a parenthetical expression a lot of times to explain what something's saying. So in that particular situation, trying to just pick one word, that's what they decided to use the word discern or wisdom, depending on what you're reading. But yeah, he took the opportunities that God gave him, along with the knowledge. I'm sure God gave him knowledge, gave him opportunity. Something caused the two women who are fighting over the child to go to him for an answer, right? They could have settled it in the backyard, I guess. So when you look at those situations, you can see that God is allowing him to have encounters that are going to allow him to not only use this blessing, but also learn from it. And I think if you look at his lifetime, you see that he's getting even better about it, and he's getting more knowledgeable, and some of that, we'll skip around and I'll try to catch up with where I am in the notes, but some of that is evident by the fact that what we would call world leaders came. This man has impressed the entire world. Jack.
Kind of like the example you just gave. It seems like what he's really looking for is good judgment. To get all this information that he has, whether it's given to him by God or he learns it, and please help me apply it correctly might be more like what he's asking for. I don't know, that's just me.
No, I agree. It's just, and then when I get to thinking, my mind, you guys know me, my mind goes all over the world. I get to thinking about that and I think, you know what, that old saying, we're using maybe 10% of our brain power. Guys like this prove that's true, right? Like, what in the world? He knew everything about everything, or he had the ability to work with any situation. Didn't matter if it was wealth, didn't matter if it was personalities, didn't matter if it was what it was. So the blessing was a tremendous blessing. He took advantage of it. He already was moving in that direction, apparent by the fact that God chose him out of the sons to be king. So that's where we are when we begin to read and look at things about him. So an interesting thing in Kings 4, so I'm just going to skip through the first 13. Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour and 60 cores of meal, 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, fattened fowl. He had dominion over all the region west of the Euphrates, from Tisphah to Gaza, over all the kings west of the Euphrates. He had peace on all sides around him, and Judah and Israel lived in safety from Dan even to Beersheba, every man under his voice and under his fig tree, all the days of Solomon. The people were happy, and there is peace on all sides. Has that ever happened in the world since then? That's the one that gets me. There was peace on all sides. We can't even agree with family members. Right? So the result just boggles the mind. And that's why we're headed toward, how can we use this? What can we do? Take the peace on all sides and take a group like this family here. How do we find a way to have peace on all sides? He found a way. We don't have peace on all sides, right? We have little disruptions here and there, and issues and problems, and in the spiritual family, and we have them in our physical family. We're not talking about all of this that's being described. And his leadership caused everybody to be at peace. It's amazing. So he excelled in, everything he tried. God gave him wisdom and understanding beyond measure, breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people east and all the wisdom of Egypt. Because of David's preparation, so then we get into Solomon beginning his kingship, or he's already in there. He's married to Pharaoh's daughter. He's doing some things. But David left him so prepared that he immediately started building the temple, and completed the temple in 7 years, and then built his house. Took 13 years to build his house, and I said something to Beth about it, like, oh, he spent more time on the house than the temple, and she said, David prepared all that stuff, and I said, oh yeah, that's true. So he didn't have to order material. But anyway, so because of the preparation, he was able to do all that stuff. And then we find down in chapter 6, the word of the Lord came to Solomon a second time. So he had a second dream. And again, in that dream, he reminds him. So potentially God is seeing some issues here. He says, concerning this house that you're building, if you walk in my statutes and obey my rules and keep all my commandments and walk in them, I will establish my word with you, which I spoke to David your father. Then he gets a visit by the Queen of Sheba. Does anybody know about the Queen of Sheba? I'm looking around. I can't find anything. Who was this person? I mean, she rode 1,200 miles on a camel to see Solomon. I'm having a hard time going 400 miles to visit family. You know? I've gotten to where if I can't fly, I'm trying to decide if I want to go or not. But took how long? Oh, yeah. Well, and the visit lasted a while. There's some stuff out there, if you look, that she had a child or who knows, and a lot of speculation about who she was, whether she was from Yemen or where she was from. Was it Nigeria? Ethiopia. Beth found something that said potentially Ethiopia. And then it's not all up here, because then she said, what about the Ethiopian eunuch? You know, maybe the Ethiopians were studying and paying attention to something back then. But she comes to visit. She brings all this treasure and leaves it. And so do other world leaders, so to speak. So he excelled. All the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. The whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. Every one of them, this is Kings 10:23. Every one of them brought his present articles of silver, gold, garments, myrrh, spices, horses, mules, so much year by year. He didn't have to work for a living, did he? It was just, so when you look at all the wealth, a huge portion of that wealth is created by all of these presents that he's getting from world leaders. God blessed him with a certain amount of wealth. He tells him after the dream, because you've asked for wisdom and not asked for the kind, and I'm paraphrasing, asking for all the things I would expect most people to ask for, wealth and stuff like that, I'm going to give those to you. I'm going to give you wealth. So God made him a wealthy person, and then all of these world leaders have made him a wealthy person. And so here he is, with a lifestyle, a certain lifestyle that creates wealth. He's king. That brings wealth into his possession. And so he became so far beyond wealth that what happened? What do you think? Just think about all the stuff. silver, gold, horses, spices, mules. Every year somebody's coming bringing stuff. Did he become obsessed with it? Yeah, Tom.
Sought to hear his wisdom. I mean, on what?
So,
You come all this way and bring him all this stuff to hear what?
so a lot of these are dignitaries, I guess. I mean, we can speculate. So you're king somewhere and you've got this problem you can't solve. Maybe Solomon turned into a therapist over here. Called him up and said, I got something I need to talk about. He's doing lectureship. He's got a lectureship going on here. A podcast. Yes. Bill?
The people brought decisions for him to make, such as the two women with one baby dead and one baby alive. And he made a very wise decision on how to question and come up with the answer. And people marveled at that and remembered that wisdom.
And how he was able to discern that. And that's the blessing God gave him.
Yeah. He said, divide the live one. And the mother of the live one said, no, give it to her.
And so he knew how to figure that out. Jeff?
I wonder if we could extend that he was able to discern not just between individuals like that, but between nations. I'm thinking about what you read about having peace on every side, and he was somehow able to mediate the things that typically cause warring and strife between nations, and to bring that peace about.
And you know what one criteria that would require? Knowledge. And that means if you're the Queen of Sheba and you've traveled 1,200 miles, he knows enough about what's going on in your society to answer all your questions accurately. Isn't that what she said? And she said, actually, even better than what I was told you could do. Right? So that's why I say that brain of his it had all the information necessary. And he had this ability to look at a situation come out. I was trying to remember, there's this little riddle that shows you things similar to him making a decision about these two ladies. And the riddle is, I forget exactly how it goes. Someone's looking for directions, and he comes and there's two people, only two people he can talk to. One is a pathological liar, and one of them always tells the truth. And you're asking, it's a fork in the roads, which way to go. What do you ask? And you don't know which is which. So what do you ask in order to get the proper direction? Do you know?
What would the other person?
That's it.
And then you go the other way.
The question is, what would the other person tell me to do? Okay, so if I'm talking to the guy that always tells the truth, he's going to tell me a lie on which fork to take, because he's going to tell me what the other person would say. If I'm talking to the guy that lies all the time, he's going to tell me what the person who's always telling the truth would say. So either one of those answers tells me which fork. I don't take that fork, but it tells me which one to take. I can discern then which is the true fork and which is the fork that's a lie. So, just a little side story. So Solomon had the ability to do that. He had the ability to look at this situation and understand between these two women here's a simple solution to this. You know, here's what I'm going to do, and whichever how they react is going to tell me exactly what decision to make. So that was the ability that God blessed him with, the ability that obviously he took seriously for a very long time. He nurtured that, he learned from it, and he reached a point where literally all of the dignitaries in the world wanted him to give them advice. Pretty amazing. And if he'd have done what God told him to do, he'd still be king, apparently, because eternity is far past where we are. As far as eternity. Yeah, long time. So then it wasn't very long, so to move along, we've got about 10 minutes or so. So it wasn't very long after that. How does this happen? He went through the wealth his father had left him to build the temple. He put such a burden on the people in taxes that they cried out against him. You know, and we read of all the holdings that he had, all of the possessions, the money, the gold, you know. The taxes were bringing in tons of gold every year. The gifts from people, like it's just so astronomical, it would take a mathematician to really tell you in today's value. That's why, even though you've got Elon Musk over here now at so many $1 billion, it boggles the mind. He's not even close. Not even close. And he had all of that, and he went through it, apparently. I mean, why did he start, or at least he decided it wasn't enough, why did he start taxing the people in such a way? And all of this is in direct conflict to the revealed will of God. Long before he became king, God saw that Israel would eventually want a king, right? And so he has warned them about that very thing, Deuteronomy 17, beginning verse 14. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. So God already knew this was going to happen. What's the point, Solomon? I mean, let's just make a wild guess. You've got 2/3 of the monetary value of the whole world in your possession. What's the value in having 3/4, or 5/5, or 4/5, or something? I mean, you want it all. And the true answer is, for most of us, I would say, in situations like that, I don't know, I'm not in that situation, but for most of us, enough is never enough. You know, you think about the cartoons, and who was the cartoon, the guy that had the vault and he counted the Scrooge. I mean, you get that way, right? It's like, man, how much can I get? An obsessive need. Yeah, not just a need. It's not It's almost not enough to just keep letting it grow like it's been growing. It needs to grow faster, right? And so, God is saying in this passage in Deuteronomy, He's saying this: I do not want you to depend upon your wealth. I do not want your military might to be wrapped up in the number of horses that you have. I do not want your concept of pleasure to be maxed out by the number of women you have in your harem. I want you to depend on me. And so there we are. That's where he wound up. The wisest man that ever lived, trying to keep 1,000 women happy.
Wasn't very wise.
All of us make
Love women.
all of us make mistakes, right? 1,000 women. So he didn't get to say like Adam, that woman you gave me. It's like that 1,000 women you gave me. Wasn't all that great. And not putting down ladies, I'm telling you, do anything for my girl over there. But I have to work pretty hard to keep her happy, right? Y'all have heard me say, I've been telling people for years, how you're doing? Well, I'm vertical, you know. And at 75, getting vertical's harder, and she's happy. Look over there, she's smiling. And getting vertical and keeping her happy is getting harder every year. But I have to get vertical in order to keep her happy. So, that's the challenge. Yes, it's just, and that's kind of stuff is what makes me wonder either what happened to the wisdom, or did he actually get there? I mean, he got there. Look at all the people that came to him for advice and decisions and all of this. Read the story. I'm not a big Old Testament fan. Bailey got his hand up back there? And Doris, you, and then Bailey.
Just occurred to me, he had done everything. There was nothing new and exciting to learn, to see. He became bored.
This is true. Bailey?
I'm not sure how much I understand the concept of or other things that in the day he would have time.
Right. No, I agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
But that's kind of the answer, right? Is that there's no way you have relations with all those five, but you have relations with some of the project. And the problem is being the king and going to project because he had as he got older. And I still say when he got old, he loved. It was not just project.
Yes.
And then there's a lot of wives, including Pharaoh's wife, who built a house for living. Again, we got all mixed up. I can feel some of it and some of it isn't.
But surely it didn't take 1,000 to have that son that he was needing. Huh?
What's interesting about the scripture is the scripture only describes one son.
Yes.
Despite all that, and it's not true about David. In the very same books where it talks about David, it describes all his sons. But for Solomon, he only had one that's in the Bible.
But give him credit. I mean, he's such a miracle in everything else. Maybe he made that whole loop with 1,000 women. How many children can you have? 7,000 kids? Yes. No, we don't have time. Yes, and that's,
And I'm like, I mean, you know, it has to come out of that. You really study that?
but,
Just one psalm we got. It's amazing.
and so then the question in the goofy logical brain back here, was he listening to himself when he did that?
I think it was personally.
Or was it remorse? It could have been, you know, here's a lesson I learned from failure. And here's a lesson I learned in there. Yes, he did.
Towards the end of his life, he began to love those women beyond what he could.
And another thing, before we beat him up too bad, the Lord loved him enough to not destroy the kingdom and all that stuff in his lifetime. You know, he told him, because you've fallen away, I'm going to do all this. Scott.
There's so many things in the stories of people of faith. There's like a double-edged sword here. His great wisdom and his ability that God gave him results in, you know, a beautiful temple, a marvelous palace. He's got great wisdom. She recognizes that the God of Israel, who loves Israel eternally, has made Solomon great and has made Israel great. So there's this double-edged sword there. The beauty and all the palatial buildings, etc., they redound to God's glory. But if the focus goes wrong, it all falls down.
And it really, if you sit and speculate a little bit, because I tell you guys, we are not in the society that Solomon lived in. You know, he lived in his own universe. We are living in a very successful society. I can see him getting to the point like, can't you guys figure something out on your own? I mean, do you have to keep bringing me all these petty little questions to answer? I mean, you know, it's just like I have so much of everything. I'm tired of what it's brought. You know, it's brought everybody oohing and eyeing. What are you going to build next? I'm tired of building stuff. Yeah.
Thinking of the wealth, there's a passage in Proverbs, not one of the sections by Solomon. It says, give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food and meat before me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who's the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God.
Yes. And I believe that we can expect that the riches God gave him was all he would ever need. But it began to pour in from other sources, and it began to influence his life. Along with, you know, possessions, along with women, it wasn't just one thing. He had everything an individual could possibly obtain in every avenue of life. And none have matched that. About time for the bell. Thanks for your comments. Oh, Stan's got a comment.
Bill, that's one of the things I was wondering, that do you know what point in his life he actually wrote Ecclesiastes?
I don't. Bailey or Scott, one of those guys.
Most likely it was in his later years, is what.
As he grew old, yeah.
Is what commentators say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for your attention. Think about it next week, and let's talk about how we are able to use some of this to learn from.